They say sound never lies. But what if even the microphones wanted to forget what they heard? When The Entity was released in 1982, it wasn't just another paranormal thriller. It was a cinematic provocation, a film that dared to put trauma in the crosshairs of the supernatural. Critics dismissed it, psychologists squirmed. And the studio? They quietly stopped talking after a few preview screenings went sideways. The movie follows Carla Moran, a single mother whose life spirals after repeated assaults by an invisible force. But here's what most viewers don't realize. The film wasn't born from imagination, it was lifted almost verbatim from a real police report. One so uncomfortable, so inexplicable, that no court wanted to touch it. And yet, Hollywood did. The director claimed it was fiction, with psychological undertones. The producers promised the haunting was just metaphor. But then came the whispers from the set, mysterious bruises appearing on the actress's body, unexplainable audio glitches during scenes of assault, and a reel that went missing and was never found. Was The Entity a dramatization of a disturbed woman's mind, or a cinematic attempt to document something no one wanted to believe? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Entity. Fact Y: the opening scene wasn't scripted to be that brutal until the studio demanded it. The first attack in The Entity is one of the most disturbing openings in horror cinema. Carla Moran is violently assaulted by an invisible force in her bedroom. What most viewers don't know is that this wasn't the original plan. The first draft had a slower psychological buildup, letting audiences question Carla's sanity before anything supernatural happened. But after test audiences found the opening boring, the studio insisted on a rewrite, one that made the trauma immediate, visceral, and inescapable. The new version was filmed in a single grueling take, with actress Barbara Hershey held in place using hidden rigs and industrial-strength wire. According to crew reports, the room's temperature dropped 10 degrees during the shoot, and multiple audio takes were plagued by static interference, specifically when Hershey screamed for help. Years later, one of the rigging technicians admitted he never watched the final cut. "It didn't feel like we were filming a movie," he said. "It felt like we were documenting something that shouldn't have been seen." And ironically, the studio kept the original version just in case the new one was too much. No one knows where that footage is now. Fact hash 2. Carla's house wasn't a set, it was a real home with its own haunting history. The suburban house seen in The Entity doesn't look like much, just another forgettable piece of Los Angeles real estate. But the production didn't build a set. They filmed in an actual home in Culver City, one that had been listed for years but couldn't sell. Neighbors claimed the property had bad energy, with previous tenants reporting broken windows, cold spots, and inexplicable electrical issues. When production began, things got weirder. Lights blew out during rehearsals. Audio gear drained batteries overnight. On one occasion, Barbara Hershey refused to enter the master bedroom alone, saying it felt like someone was already in there. Even more unsettling, the real Carla Doris Bither lived just 15 minutes away during filming. She reportedly visited the set once, stood silently outside the house for several minutes, then left without speaking. The owners sold the house a year after the film wrapped at a loss. The buyer? A sound engineer who'd worked on the movie. He lasted 6 months. Fact hash 3. The bedroom scene with floating furniture was almost canceled until something unexplainable happened. One of the film's most iconic moments shows Carla thrown onto the bed as drawers open, objects levitate, and the room erupts in chaos. The crew had planned to shoot the sequence using practical effects, fishing wires, compressed air, and hidden pulleys. But during early tests, nothing worked. The rigging malfunctioned. Furniture didn't move right. Shots looked fake. That night, assistant director Harold Klein stayed behind to rework the choreography and swore he heard the bed creak and the mirror crack on its own. The next morning, the mirror was cracked. No one could explain it. And oddly, after that incident, the shoot went smoothly, almost too smoothly. All props responded as planned. No more failures. One grip jokingly asked, "You think The Entity's working for us now?" When asked years later if they used CGI or rotoscoping, the director laughed. "We didn't have the budget or tech for that. What you see is what happened." And the cracked mirror? It was never in the script. Fact C. Psychologists protested the script, then the studio hired one to approve it. Not long after Carla's initial attack, she visits a psychiatrist who suggests her trauma might be rooted in unresolved childhood abuse. That scene sparked outrage before the film even premiered. Early drafts of the script were circulated to medical consultants, and the backlash was immediate. Several psychologists wrote to the studio, warning that the script could blur the line between mental illness and the supernatural in harmful ways. Instead of rewriting, the studio took a different route. They brought in a well-known psychiatrist to consult and publicly endorse the psychological framing of the film. But insiders say his involvement was purely cosmetic. He reviewed only selected scenes, and his feedback was mostly ignored. One of the producers allegedly joked, "We didn't hire him to fix the script. We hired him to shut people up." The irony? The real woman the film was based on had undergone psychiatric evaluation, and those records were sealed. Fact #5. Barbara Hershey didn't know the story was real until it was too late to quit. Barbara Hershey's performance as Carla is widely praised, but few know she accepted the role believing it was purely fictional. The script she received had no mention of Doris Bither or the real-life case. It wasn't until halfway through filming during a press junket that a journalist casually asked her what she thought about playing someone who actually went through this. Stunned, Hershey reportedly confronted the director, who admitted the film was based on a heavily documented case, but reassured her it had been cinematically adjusted. Hershey stayed on the project but requested no more details about the real woman. She later said in an interview, "If I had known everything from the start, I probably would have passed. There's a weight to truth that fiction can't prepare you for." She never worked in horror again. Fact #6. The sound engineers kept hearing breathing, but no one was on mic. As Carla's experiences grow more violent in the film, the sound design becomes increasingly important, building tension with subtle hisses, hums, and ambient dread. But not all of it was intentional. During editing, engineers began noticing faint breathing sounds under certain scenes despite no actors being mic'd at the time. At first, they assumed it was leftover noise from boom mics or ambient takes. But when they isolated the tracks, the breathing persisted low, rhythmic, and unmistakably human. One editor tried to remove it, but each time he did, a new technical glitch would appear elsewhere in the timeline. The team eventually gave up and left the sounds in. They figured no one would notice, except people did. Fans have since time-stamped the audio online, comparing it to EVP, electronic voice phenomena, from actual paranormal investigations. One Redditor asked, "Did they record the haunting or invite it?" Fact #7. The parapsychology lab was modeled after a real UCLA experiment that was abruptly shut down. Midway through the film, Carla is introduced to a group of university parapsychologists who attempt to measure the invisible attacks in a controlled lab. This wasn't an invention of the screenwriters. The scenes were modeled after a real experiment conducted at UCLA in the 1,970 seconds, involving the woman whose life inspired the entity. In reality, a team of researchers, including physicist Dr. Barry Taff, set up infrared cameras, motion sensors, and electromagnetic detectors in Doris Bither's home. They claimed to witness or record flickering lights, cold zones, and even a greenish mist forming above her bed. The studio initially reached out to Dr. Taff to serve as a consultant, but communication ceased suddenly. Rumors say UCLA pressured him to distance himself from the production, fearing backlash or reputational damage. The film's depiction of the lab isn't just accurate, it mimics the exact layout and equipment placement from archival photos. And yes, in both versions, the entity followed her outside. Fact #8. Multiple film reels went missing during post-production, including one from the lab scene. After wrapping the intense laboratory sequence where Carla is strapped down and violently attacked again, production ran into a bizarre hiccup. When the reels were delivered for post-production, one was missing entirely. It contained the original first cut of the final lab assault, a scene that took 2 days to shoot with elaborate rigging and special effects. Security logs showed the reel had been checked in. Then, nothing. The footage was gone. The studio launched an internal audit, suspecting theft or sabotage, but no one was ever held responsible. The sequence had to be reshot from memory, and the second version was reportedly tamer than the original. Cameraman Richard Clive, who operated during the lost take, later claimed, "That scene felt cursed. Everyone was on edge. Then it just vanished as if it didn't want to be seen." He quit film work a year later. Fact #9. A script supervisor quit after a night shoot and refused to explain why. Night shoots always carry tension, but one in particular pushed the crew over the edge. It was a simple exterior scene, Carla walking back to her car under a street lamp, feeling the entity's presence. But something strange happened during blocking. The light kept flickering, even though it had new bulbs. The camera battery drained repeatedly. Then the on-set script supervisor, a seasoned industry veteran, walked off the set mid-shoot. She didn't return the next day. When production called her, she declined to give a reason, only saying, "I won't be part of this anymore." Her assistant later told a PA she had seen a shape in the monitor that wasn't in the frame. What's unsettling is that the footage from that night does show a flicker, just one frame of something tall and distorted by lens flare. The studio chalked it up to a light leak, but they cut the shot anyway. Fact Hasson 0. The ice chamber sequence was inspired by a real proposal that got laughed out of academia. Near the climax, researchers attempt to trap the entity in a freezing chamber, hoping it can be isolated and studied. It feels like pure sci-fi, except it wasn't. During the actual investigation of Doris Bither, one researcher proposed a method eerily similar: to lure the entity into a controlled space using electromagnetic fields and sudden temperature shifts. The idea was met with laughter from fellow scientists. "You want to freeze a ghost?" one of them reportedly said. The scriptwriters heard about this anecdote through secondhand interviews and built it into the story, but they elevated it into full-on cinematic madness, turning a fringe theory into a $50,000 set piece. Dry ice, hydraulic rigs, and pressurized fog systems were used to simulate the freezing chamber. Ironically, some of the most skeptical critics of the film later admitted that part was too ridiculous, which might mean it was the truest part. No one's tried it since. Fact Hasson. The director refused to be present during the final attack scene. For the climactic final attack, where Carla is violently assaulted under laboratory supervision, the atmosphere on set turned grim. Despite months of production, rehearsals, and effects tests, director Sidney J. Furie reportedly stepped away just before filming began. An assistant directed the sequence in his place. When asked why, Furie told a friend, "There are lines I don't want to cross, not even for cinema." The scene required Barbara Hershey to simulate convulsions while being strapped to a gurney as machinery exploded around her. Technicians wore full safety gear. One even had earplugs for psychological protection, whatever that meant. The final shot, with the ghost seemingly manifesting as a shape in the fog, was achieved using an old rear projection trick. But the original concept had something else, something no one ever explained. The storyboard labeled it simply, "It appears." The scene was reworked days before filming. The director never said why. Fact Hasson 2. A stunt coordinator suffered a breakdown and blamed the rhythm of the attacks. One of the film's most underrated elements is the pacing of the attacks, sudden bursts of violence, then stillness. But staging those sequences took a toll. During the final week of shooting, stunt coordinator Jeremy Walsh was hospitalized after what crew described as a panic collapse. He refused to speak to reporters, but one medic recalled him whispering something odd: "It knew when we dropped our guard." In post-production, editors noticed a strange pattern. Several key scenes had timing anomalies, frames duplicated, sounds slightly distinct, action stutters that weren't visible during dailies. They had to redigitize from alternate backups to get usable cuts. Walsh never worked in horror again. In a rare interview years later, he simply said, "There's a rhythm to fear. This movie found it. Then it pushed it too far." He declined to elaborate. Fact Hasson 3. The ending title card was added at the last minute because the real story hadn't ended. At the end of The Entity, after all the experiments and psychological evaluations, Carla moves into a new home. For a moment, it seems like peace, until she's attacked again. The screen fades to black, and a stark title card appears. Carla Moran and her children now live in another city. The attacks continue. That line wasn't in the original script. The original ending left things more ambiguous. But during editing, the real-life inspiration for Carla, Doris Bither, reached out to someone on the crew. She reportedly said, "Tell them it's still happening." The message made its way to the director, who insisted on closing with a factual note to honor her. Producers resisted, arguing it would invite legal scrutiny or ridicule. But the director won the argument barely, and so the title card stayed, a quiet nod to the unresolved, or a warning. Fact Hasson 4. Censors in Europe demanded cuts, but no one could agree on what was too much. When The Entity was submitted to European censors, reactions were mixed and confused. The British Board of Film Classification demanded cuts to the assault sequences, claiming they were lingering, intrusive, and possibly eroticized. But others on the panel argued that the brutality was essential to the story. In France and Germany, different versions of the film aired, each one cutting different scenes. Some removed moments of Hershey's facial expressions, others trimmed the scientific discussions, claiming they legitimized pseudoscience. One country even requested that the ending be altered to make it look like Carla had hallucinated everything. No consistent international version of The Entity exists today. In interviews, Barbara Hershey commented, "It was like the film itself refused to be pinned down, just like the story it told. Fact Haishon 5. The studio tried to bury the film after release, but it wouldn't die. The entity had a lukewarm box office run in 1982. Critics were divided, some called it exploitative, others called it brave. The studio, fearing backlash and lawsuits, quickly shifted promotional efforts away from the film and let it fade. No extended theatrical run, no awards campaign, no major home video push, but the film refused to be forgotten. VHS bootlegs spread in paranormal circles. College classes began screening it in sociology and feminist theory courses. And in the early 2000s, interest spiked again just as new interviews with investigators of the real case resurfaced. Today, the entity is seen not just as a horror film, but as a cultural artifact, something made with one intention but remembered for another. The studio eventually tried to reboot it. It never happened. Fact X. A studio archivist went missing along with a box of unused audio tapes. Months after the entity had finished post-production, a junior archivist working at the studio's sound department reportedly vanished without a trace. His last log task was cataloging a series of unused ambient audio tapes from the film recordings made during long takes and between scenes. Security footage showed him entering the archive room late at night. He never clocked out. When questioned, the studio claimed the tapes were non-essential, consisting of background silence and mic tests. But one sound editor remembered those reels differently. There were whispers on them, breathing, scratching. It wasn't feedback, it was rhythmic. The box was never recovered. The archivist was never found. And the entry for that reel in the archive log? Blacked out. Fact Haishon 7. Barbara Hershey had nightmares for months and refused to do promotional interviews. While the film gained traction with genre fans, Barbara Hershey all but disappeared from its publicity circuit. Unlike most leading actors, she gave no TV interviews, skipped red carpet events, and refused to attend the wrap party. Privately, she admitted to castmates that she'd been experiencing recurring dreams, always involving mirrors, static, and a bedroom that looked like Carla's but wasn't. She asked producers not to contact her for sequels or spin-offs. "Let this story rest," she allegedly said. Years later, when asked by a journalist if she regretted the role, she paused and replied, "I don't regret the work, but some things follow you longer than you expect." To this day, the entity remains one of her most powerful and most avoided performances. Fact Haishon 8. The real Carla allegedly watched the film then refused to speak about it again. Doris Bither, the woman whose life inspired the film, lived in relative obscurity by the time the entity premiered. Journalists tried to find her. Paranormal investigators wanted her on record, but she remained silent. One source claims she did watch the film once at a private screening arranged by a sympathetic academic. Halfway through, she reportedly stood up and walked out. "They made it look clean," she said. It wasn't clean. She refused all further comment. Some believe she kept journals of her later experiences. If they exist, no one has found them. Her sons have never confirmed or denied the events. And so, the final word on what really happened never came from the one person who lived through it. Fact Haishon. A mathematician tried to analyze the film's audio and found a hidden pattern. Years after the entity had faded from public attention, a mathematician with a fascination for psychoacoustics ran the film's audio through a spectrographic analyzer. What he found wasn't music or dialogue, it was repetition. Deep in the sub-audible frequencies, buried under the soundtrack, were pulses that repeated at regular intervals, but only during the attack scenes. At first, he suspected it was part of the score, some subliminal effect to unnerve the audience. But when he contacted the film's composer, the answer was chilling. "We never added anything like that, not even close." Even more bizarre, when he removed the music and dialogue, the pulse was still there. It didn't exist in the film's isolated tracks, only in the final mixed print. The studio dismissed it as digital artifacting. But the mathematician's paper is still online, titled Rhythmic Anomalies in Narrative Space. No one has peer-reviewed it. Fact #20. Viewers reported feeling touched during screenings and not in the metaphorical sense. While the entity was never a commercial blockbuster, it developed a cult following, especially in late-night theatrical runs during the 1,990 seconds. Several theater owners began reporting something unusual, viewers walking out mid-film, claiming they felt a presence. Some described it as a chill. Others said they felt pressure on their chest or limbs during key scenes. Most chalked it up to suggestion or atmospheric sound design. But at least 2 theaters filed formal complaints to the distributor after incidents where audience members fainted or claimed they were grabbed by something unseen. No lawsuits followed, but the screenings quietly stopped. The studio made no comment. Years later, one theater employee recalled locking up after a midnight showing and hearing a knock from inside the projection booth. He never found anyone there. Bonus fact: the entity has no official copyright record, and no one can agree who owns it. For a film made by a major studio, the entity has an oddly fragile paper trail. When researchers attempted to locate its full copyright documentation in the Library of Congress, they found fragments, partial entries, mismatched registration codes, and at least one listing under an unrelated title. What's stranger, no single entity appears to own full rights. The original production company dissolved in the 1,990 seconds. The distributor claims they hold domestic licenses but not international, and the screenwriter's estate, when contacted, replied, "We don't represent that title anymore." This has made the entity notoriously difficult to restore, remaster, or stream. Each time a company attempts to re-release it, something falls through: missing materials, conflicting ownership, unrecoverable negatives. One archivist put it bluntly, "It's like the film doesn't want to exist, or maybe something doesn't want it seen again." So which of these 20 facts unsettled you the most? Was it the missing reel, the audio pulse no one could trace, or the idea that the film itself may not want to be found again? Let us know what you think in the comments, and tell us which film we should pull apart next. Some movies entertain, others haunt. The entity never made that choice.